right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's live stream with Matt Dietrich, Ursula, and West Indies Rum Distillery, with three very special guests from the distillery. We have Andrew Hassell here, John Benn, Dario Jordon. I'm going to let Matt give you guys a little more formal introduction in just a moment. Before we jump in, I want to let all of you in the audience know how to interact with Matt and your guests throughout the presentation today, which, by the way, there's already a lot of people saying hello from all over the world. Steve is saying hello from Australia, where it is 3 a.m. right now. So kudos to Steve. Steve gets bonus points for tuning in at 3 in the morning. That's awesome. So yeah, as I said, there's a chat box to the right. Feel free to say hello. Let us know where you're tuning in from. If you have a question at any point during the presentation, there's an Ask a Question button at the bottom of the screen. So just click that button, put your question in there. And last but not least, please feel free to invite your friends to join us. There's a share button at the top that makes that easy. But with all that said, Matt, I will turn things over to you now.
All right. Thank you, Will. It's good to be here. If any of you have watched these things in the past, you might notice my background looks a little different here. It's actually a small miracle that I'm with you guys today. We had a major hurricane come roaring through New Orleans last night. Luckily, not much damage, but we're without power. Luckily, we have a friend whose house does have power, and so we grabbed all the computers and equipment and dashed over there. So I got on just in the nick of time, and so I'm thrilled to actually be here this time around. In terms of these sessions, this is, I think, the 10th or 11th session we've done with WORSPA member producers, which I am the community envoy. When COVID hit, our goal was to basically take rum enthusiasts sort of behind the scenes with rum distilleries that they couldn't go visit right now, like we can't travel. So we were like, well, this is a great opportunity. Everybody's getting online anyhow. Let's get rum enthusiasts, connected with the actual people making the rum. Not the marketing team, not the brand ambassadors, the actual people making the rum. Go behind the scenes, see the distilleries, ask the interesting questions, learn all about fermentation, distillation, aging, and all that kind of stuff. So I've been thrilled to host this. Today we're at joining us from West Indies Rum Distillery is Dario, Benn, and Andrew, and I'll have them just introduce themselves in just a moment. But a quick story: I visited West Indies in October of 2018, and I did not know it at the time, but my host was Andrew, and when I visited Andrew, we met in his office. It was at 9 o'clock or so, and for 3 hours we just sat and talked history. Like, we went through all the documents and stuff. We talked history, and it was thrilling. We didn't even go out to the distillery till after lunch or lunchtime. So, anyhow, I think there's a lot of interesting stuff to see here. We're going to get into the stills and all sorts of good stuff. So, really quickly, let's have Dario give us a quick background of what you do at West Indies.
Good day to everyone. Basically, for my role at the West Indies Rum is essentially just be responsible for the production aspect. So this includes the fermentation, various stills, and managing the direction for which we want to produce. And then I would then report to Don, who oversees the entire operations.
Great. Okay, thank you. And Don, tell us what you do there.
Hi, Matt, and hi to everyone on the call. And it's a pleasure to be here. Right, so I work with Dario and a number of other persons in the operations team. So as Dario said, he's overseeing fermentation and distillation. But my other responsibilities would include our aging program and how we bottle. And I'm the master distiller here at the distillery as well. So I pay special attention to what we're doing in the distillation area, trying to be sure we can manage all of the different equipment we have to keep producing our great rums.
Excellent. Thank you, Don. And Andrew, you're up.
Yeah, I'm Andrew Hassell. I'm the managing director of West Indies Rum. And as Matt mentioned, I have a passion for history. I'm not a historian. And I would like to add some things. Dario is a national hockey player, and he's a very good hockey player. Don is a nationally ranked squash player, and I'm a surfer. So hi to the guy that's up at 3 a.m. in Australia. How are you doing? Are there any waves? But really looking forward to this, and thanks Matt and Will for organizing this and WORSPA. We're really excited to share some of the exciting things that we're doing here at the distillery. We see this as a great opportunity.
Great. And Andrew, just really quick, how long have you been at West Indies? I think you told me, but can you refresh me?
Yeah, I've been here about 11 years.
Okay.
11 years.
Okay, excellent. All right, and Will, let's jump into the slides.
Okay, so I'm going to start, and we're going to interchange a bit. So, West Indies rum, we've been making rum since 1893. So it's just over 120 years making rum. We have 75 direct employees, and we have currently 8 stills. We consider ourselves the backbone of Barbados rum. We're the largest distillery in Barbados, and we have been since about 1895. When the distillery was originally built, it was obviously a lot smaller than it is today. So, well, if you want to go on to the next slide. Right. So the distillery was built by a great gentleman, a great distiller. His name was George Stade. George Stade had a lot of patents. He was an engineer. He was very involved in the sugarcane industry and rum distillation business. That picture there is of a large wooden vat that was built in Mexico, and George Stade is the gentleman on the side with his hands behind his back. And George Stade had lots of patents. And some of those patents we have here at the distillery. So I'll hold this one up. Well, this isn't a patent. This is one of his pamphlets. And you can see his name down here. And he worked with Robert Ilgs. So you can look up Ilgs and see what Ilgs was famous for. But George Stade really was a kind of gentleman ahead of his time. He had a lot of ideas about what was good quality rum, what was the best way to produce rum, the most efficient way to produce the best quality, most flavors, etc. So that was George. Well, you can do the next slide. West Indies rum really is a museum of rum making. I tell the staff they're working in a museum. We have, as an example, we have this instrument which records some of the parameters of the still, and we were looking for some parts for it. And I went online and I looked for it, and the only other working piece of equipment I could find was one that was in the British Science Museum. So when we say we are a museum of rum, we are basically a working museum. We have very interesting stills and equipment here. We also have lots of documents, but I will go into that later.
Next slide.
So, as most of you know, in 2017, West Indies Rum, which was a public company, became a privately owned company. There was a great synergy between West Indies Rum and Maison Ferrand. Maison Ferrand had been a customer of West Indies Rum for many years, and we had a very good relationship. And you basically had a distillery that was looking for a brand and a brand that was looking for a distillery, and the marriage has been phenomenal. The Maison Ferrand team has committed to the people and the government of Barbados that all of the profits that the distillery makes are reinvested back into the distillery. So those of you out there that are fans of the Plantation rum brand and also West Indies Rum Distillery, by you supporting those products, it's basically allowing the distillery to be profitable, and then we're taking those funds and reinvesting them back in the distillery. So a lot of the projects that we're working on today would not be possible without your support. So all of you that have taken the time to watch this, I would like to thank you, because I personally, as the managing director, I see you as stakeholders in this dream partnership, and you are a member of that partnership as well. And I would like to say thank you on behalf of myself personally, but also the West Indies rum team.
Hey, Andrew. I don't know if you're gonna. Oh, okay. Yeah, you got it. Keep going. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So this is a quick timeline of the distillery. Distillery was built in 1892. In 1893, George Stade and his brother Herman began operating the distillery, and it was called Stade Brothers. Very soon after that, its name was changed to West India Rum Refinery. Herman Stade's, he was no longer part of the distillery, so it was George Stade. And in 1901, it's not there in the timeline, but I'll mention it. In 1901, the company, the distillery became a public company. And what happened during that period was a lot of the customers between 1893 and 1901, who were a lot of the merchants and also some of the other companies in Barbados, they were the customers when George Stade returned to Europe. The company became a public company, and they became shareholders.
And I think I was
yeah, sure.
I was going to say, I think it's important for people. I think people don't really understand that as I understand it, West Indies was not built to be like a distillery like that had its own brand. It was primarily, it had customers, and can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Right. So prior to 1893 in Barbados, most of the plantations had pot stills. People may have had their own rum brands, etc. George Stade, as I mentioned at the start, had a lot of patents, and he built this beautiful distillery where he knew he could produce a great quality rum. And he basically went around to the people that had their rum brands, etc., and said, "Look, come and purchase rum from me. Try my rum. I'm sure you'll like it." And very quickly they all transitioned. So he built the distillery really as kind of a showpiece, as to show what great rum can be produced using a column still primarily at the time. He did not build a distillery. He wasn't someone that had a brand, that specifically had his own brand, and was building the distillery to support his brand. And pretty much that was the business model really until 2017.
Okay. And if I remember correctly as well, the West Indies had the first column still in Barbados. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. So George Stade patented the design of his still. It was patented in Barbados, and so the rum in Barbados was known as patent still rum or refined rum or Stade's rum. And yes, it was definitely the first column still in Barbados. Moving along, around 1932, the distillery had its own cooperage. That cooperage we still have today, and basically it obviously prepared barrels. It did a lot of different tasks, a lot of cooperage tasks, and it also provided those services for the other merchants, etc. in Barbados. So not only did it deal with the rum barrels for West Indies rum, it dealt with barrels for other merchants, and we have the record showing what was charged and what was done there. But obviously, prior to 1930, and everything was in wooden barrels, all different types of wooden barrels, different sizes, different shapes.
Right. And at that era, although you had the cooperage, you were not building barrels and then laying down lots of stock at West Indies. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, you have to remember Barbados. Barbados was a British colony, and we got our independence in 1966. So a lot of our rum, there were government bonded warehouses, and rum was basically aged, to think, by the government. And so in various locations in Barbados, there were bonded warehouses, and the rum was aged. The rum was aged there. But yes, most of the rum being sold was unaged rum that then was was shipped overseas and was then aged and by different customers. Moving along, in 1936, the distillery purchased Batson's Distillery. Batson's Distillery was a small distillery started by a gentleman called Charles Batson. And he basically went around Barbados talking to the same people that George Stade would have spoken to and said, do you still have an old pot still, etc. And basically Batson's was a pot still business. And in 1936, West Indies Rum purchased that business. We still have all of the information, like exactly what was purchased. And we also purchased the site, which was on Bay Street, Barbados. And we acquired some pot stills that we will go into and mention later. But thanks to Charles Batson, these pot stills still exist because he is the person that basically went and purchased them from the various plantations, and then West Indies Rum purchased his company. In 1941, this was at the start of World War I, the distillery would have purchased the Vulcan 3-chamber still. This is a very unique still. We will talk a little bit more about that. Technically, I'll let the engineers do that, but a very interesting piece of world history, a fascinating piece of equipment, and also produces great rum, exciting rum. In 1945, the Blair's column still is installed at the distillery, and that was the Barbados had to supply rum to the British Navy, etc. And there was a huge demand, and using the old George Stade column, we basically could not keep up. So according to our records, we then purchased the Blair's column still in 1945.
Yeah, real quick there, Andrew. I know. Go back. Will, can you go back the slide? If my recollection is correct, that picture on the left with the jetty and the distillery, my recollection is that jetty ran almost right up to the distillery, but that's not the case now. Can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, so that's interesting. That jetty, there was actually an act of parliament passed in Barbados in 1892 to get permission to build that jetty, and the jetty was used. A jetty in those days was almost like a runway at the airport. It was used to transport goods, bring goods in, out, etc. So George Stades had to go to Parliament to get permission to build that jetty. No, it doesn't exist anymore, but believe it or not, we have the engineering drawings for that jetty.
Okay.
So technically, if we wanted to, we could rebuild the jetty.
Right. But right now, yeah. But now there's beach there, which was not there, if I remember at the time.
Pardon me?
Isn't there now much more beach there than there once was?
Yes, correct. So this distillery is very close to the main port in Barbados, and once that port was built, it basically blocked the flow of sand flowing down the coast of the island of Barbados, and we now have a very large beach in front of the distillery. But yeah, it's a part of Barbados history. We have people in their 70s who come and say they remember the jetty actually faces, that picture is looking directly east, but so the end of the jetty faces directly west. So we have people in their 70s that say their first kiss was on the end of that jetty with some lady or whatever. And it was also known to be a great fishing point. The two things, people that know the jetty said it was great for fishing, and it was also kind of a lover's lane for teenagers.
And next slide, Will.
Okay, so in 1957, the distillery acquired the Gregg farm still, and that's a very old pot still, but once again, we will say a little bit about more about that. In 1975, the John Doerr still, and then as mentioned before, March 2017, we entered the partnership with Maison Ferrand. In 2018, we were very happy. While the Vulcan was here, we hadn't used it in a while. We basically revived the Vulcan and we started it back up. And Dario was a big part of that with Don. And it produced some great rum. Where we are now in 2020 is we have a new pot still called the hot pot still. And like I said, we'll talk about that a little bit later. And then also we have a teaser there, Stage Rum is Reborn. So stay tuned for that.
All right, so this slide, Matt really starts to describe now one of the reasons why the distillery was located in this area. It's in an area called Spring Garden, and well known that the surface or the water is very close to the surface here in this area. So there's evidence of springs. There's an underground flow of water coming from inland. So it was naturally a good place to put a distillery because most distilleries or all distilleries would need a good supply of water to be able to ferment and to distill. So it's the same water we've been using since 1893. We do have a partnership with the Barbados government that allows us to continue to use the water in this area. It's a very high quality water. We do still have to reverse osmosis or perform some other purification, but straight out of the ground, it can be used in our fermentation process. And it's really something that I think we were able to be very fortunate that George State had the vision to put a distillery right here. It's near to the port, it's near to the sea, and has access to a very good supply of water. Next, right. So thank you, Will. The molasses obviously now is a need for all rum distilleries. And here at West Indies Rum, we are fortunate to be able to use either blackstrap molasses, we can use syrup, or we can use juice as well. Origins, and you can see there on the slide, Barbados, Dominican Republic, Panama. We try to get from the Central American and Caribbean area as much as we can. Barbados, unfortunately, can't supply all of our molasses needs for the year, but what we get from Barbados, we use exclusively for the Plantation brand. Now, being able to source molasses becomes a challenge every year. So a lot of effort goes into that. We do have to go through a very rigid selection process to be sure we get the right quality of molasses because it can impact negatively if you do not get the right type of molasses. So both from the quality standpoint of the rum and the ability to ferment and distill, it's really critical that we put the effort in to getting the right type of molasses. So that's why we limited to those sources there that we see. Now, sustainability is obviously now very important and it always has been, but even more so now from a consumer standpoint. Consumers are a lot more educated about, the link between agriculture and food and being able to have communities who can survive and still be respected and not be taken advantage of. So I can guarantee you that every parcel of molasses that we get, we are trying to be sure it's either certified, Bon Sucro, Proterra, or we work closely with the supplier to be able to say, well, okay, are you engaging in sustainable practices from these communities that you're able to source the molasses from?
And quick question. If I understand correctly, there's only one large sugar factory in Barbados today. Is that correct?
Yes, at the moment, and there used to be several factories, but as the quantity of cane decreased, clearly there was less of a need for so many factories. So right now, only one factory operates.
Okay.
And the crop really only lasts for maybe 3 to 4 months of the year, and then after that, we're having to get from our external sources.
Right. Okay.
I guess I would jump in at this point. In the fermentation, though, this is where all of the magic really happens. And for any rum producer, they would tell you that the fermentation the fermentation is where you create all your flavors. This is where you really get your rum. So at the distillery right now, working along with myself, we have 13 persons who work directly under me. Very skilled technicians who operate the fermentation and distillation aspects on a 24-hour basis. And they actually make sure that from beginning to end, we do our checks very frequently. So this is where we really need to mix the scientific background with the art of making rum, because fermentation is the most complex part of making rum. I mean, there have been so many simulations for distillation for different equipment. Even with modern technology, they can model almost any piece of equipment, any function, any distillation, but they still cannot accurately describe and model fermentation process. Now, this is because when you're using yeast, and the yeast selection goes a far way in dealing with the fermentation. So we make sure that we start off on a good basis. So Don handles the sourcing of the molasses, and then is to best utilize that molasses, we need to use the correct yeast. Now, having selected yeast or cultured yeast from suppliers allows us to direct the fermentation in a certain direction, but there are certain flavors you're only going to get when you're going to use the indigenous yeast, the yeast that comes along with the molasses that originates from the cane source. When you get these yeast now into the fermentation, you then have to control their environment. And the reason I say this is the most complex scenario, this is the most complex process, is that just the temperature alone, the temperature changes during fermentation, the length of time of the fermentation, you can change your complete output. So you can get very light to very heavy, very sweet to very estery, just on temperature, length of time, you can change the pH. There's a lot of technical background in deciding how you're going to set your fermentation. We have the ability here to do a range of light, very light to heavy, sweeter rums, just because we have the ability to manipulate our conditions in the fermentation. So you see a picture there of what the fermentation used to be in the earlier times. We've now moved to more large-scale stainless steel tanks, which offer very controlled temperature controls and a very more structured system towards the fermentation aspect. And as much as we say we do these, it still takes a skilled team. So we have 13 persons working along myself, as well as the QA department, which is headed by Terry, who you see in the picture on the right. And even going away from just doing the day-to-day fermentations, we also have time to explore the experimentation aspect. So we've been looking into local yeast, and yeast can be found in many different areas. But when you get these microbes from, let's say, cane sources, the ground, or wherever source you want to do that's indigenous or specific to your area, that can just open up a whole set of fermentation rum types that you can actually produce. So what we do is we make sure that all of our rum processes, we make sure that we use a batch fermentation. We control every single fermenter that goes through the system. So we were very lucky that we had documentation from the inception of the company that can show us what was done then. And we can take that knowledge now and use in our experiments now and try to develop and see if we can improve on what was done then or recreate a good thing from back then.
Hey, Dario, a couple of questions. Christina asked, how many strains of yeast do you use overall?
Well, that is not a number I can put right now because we have our main production yeast. We would then have indigenous yeast, which we can't really quantify because they are there in the environment, and you can't really quantify how many different strains are there presently. So, and then we have the strains that we would then explore in our experiments. So it's a hard number to just give.
There's not a fixed, like we do use 5 different yeast for 5 different.
No, this all depends on what we want to produce, what is our end target, what our customer base. So we have the potential to make a very wide range of rums. And we then select the yeast, the process, the conditions based on what our end target is supposed to be.
Okay. So another thing I wanted to point out there is it's not clear from this picture, but your fermentation is not just sort of one centralized fermentation area. It's a very long distillery, if I remember, and so you have different sort of fermentation vats for like different stills. Is that correct?
Yeah. So we would have our main fermentation area with the stainless steel, more of the high volume. But we have wooden fermenters, and we're even installing more wooden fermenters to expand on that region. And sometimes you may take a walk 3 to 5 minutes from one fermenter to the next fermenter. It's spread across the distillery at this point. So we have the ability to go and explore different fermentation techniques just on where the fermenter is located, what the humidity is around it, if it has a lot of breeze blowing through. All of those affect what your end fermentation will be like.
Okay. So is it fair to say, for example, that your large scale, like, you know, the big column that you would run, that's going to be like the large stainless steel fermentation tanks. But if you look at like the smaller stills, like the pot stills or the Vulcan stills, they may have smaller individual wooden fermentation vats. Is that a good assessment?
Well, that's a half truth, where
Okay.
we have the ability, we can pull from these same large scale fermenters into the pot stills if we need it, because there are times where you would want a fermentation technique that the large scale would give that you may not get in your small wooden fermenters. So again, we don't want to tighten down or limit the productions or the type of rum productions we can do, just to say large scale stainless steel only for a column and wooden for a pot. We like to make sure we have a range of options that we can produce any type of rum.
Okay. Okay. Next slide.
Okay, so just a little bit of history. This is the Rockley still, or it was produced by James Shears and Sons from London. We know that because it has its original door on it. It was looked at by David Pym, the president and owner of John Doerr, and his comment is that the small copper pot still at West Indies Rum in Barbados is, to my knowledge, the oldest rum pot still in the world still in existence. It is a great piece of rum history. And it's really cool, like if you're into pot stills, etc., to look at this still, because not only is it riveted, when you look at the rivets are hand-beaten rivets. So that, for any coppersmith, that gives them an indication as to the age of the pot still, but also they can look at the design of the pot still and get an indication to the age. So James Shears and Sons were very famous coppersmiths, and they were in London. And if you go on the internet and look them up, you can see where they were located in London, etc., and basically when they went out of business. But a real cool pot still, and we have some interesting plans for that still. So please stay tuned.
Yeah. So are there any diagrams that show that still with the neck and things like that, where it was all set up?
That particular still, I'm not sure. I mean, we have a lot of technical drawings here at the distillery. That one, we haven't matched all of them back, but that one I don't think so. But I'm not 100% sure.
Okay.
But we believe there is documentation of that still that will show us that for sure.
Okay.
The next still we have is Batson's Bitch, and that's with all due respect, that was what it was called in Barbados. That still does not have its original door. The top of the still was replaced. If you could see the pot still close up, you would notice that it has machine-made rivets. And also what you would notice is the bottom part of the pot still, which is the original part, is about twice as thick as the top part of the pot still. That's because pot stills of this era tended to be direct fire, meaning a flame was applied directly to them as opposed to steam. So they tended to be thicker pot stills, particularly the base. Unfortunately, we don't have the door to know originally where the pot still came from. We were told that was its nickname because it used to leak quite a lot from where the new top was joined to the bottom. Back in the, remember this is, we would have purchased this company and acquired this pot still in 1936. So so we're talking back in the 30s, 20s, where the bottom of the still was joined to the top. And we're told it was called Batson's bitch because it used to leak. It used to give them a lot of problems to leak. And we also have plans for that still as well. And we do have more drawings with regards to that still than the previous still. But once again, a 19th century still, a very old still, really a piece of world history that you know that is quite interesting. Next slide. We have the Greg Farm pot still. This pot still was made by Leishman and Welsh. Leishman and Welsh were very famous coppersmiths from Liverpool. Welsh's niece was Lady Jane Carlisle Welsh. And if any of you are from the UK, and you probably know of Lady Jane Carlisle Welsh, and she's a lady who wrote about her life in England at this time. It was kind of a diary. It's a very famous literary work. And she was John Welsh's niece, but she actually lived with him. And if you read her document, she actually speaks about her uncle's business and how his business is going, etc. And Leishman, the other partner, basically worked with Stevenson on the train network in the UK. So he was a very famous engineer in terms of implementation. And actually, there's a famous train called the Rocket, and I know it used to be located in the British Science Museum. And the firebox for the Rocket was made by Leishman and Welsh. This pot still is a very interesting pot still again. It looks silver, but it's actually 100% copper. It's very thick copper. It looks silver because the distillery is right next to the beach. And so we over the years, we painted it silver so it basically wouldn't rust or get tarnished. This pot still, when you guys get to come to Barbados, you'll see the bottom of it is concave. And it's concave because basically, once again, it was a direct fire pot still. And we still use this pot still. And Don will now give you a little bit about how we use it today and a bit more technical information about it.
Okay.
Right. So thanks, Andrew. And as Andrew said, the base is concave and would have been direct fired, but we now have a coil that allows us to drive it with steam. So it's not injected steam, but it's an indirect supply of steam. We're able to do both types of distillation, be it wash for the first run, or the low wines from the first run. We can recharge this pot still to produce the final product. So we normally do it as a double batch distillation, which is the traditional style of Barbadian rum when rum was first made here in Barbados. The idea behind this still is it has a very unusual neck where we've replaced basically the entire neck section with a partial condenser. So there is a slightly higher level of reflux that occurs with this still than a normal pot still with just a neck going to a condenser, to the final condenser. That allows us really to concentrate up the volatiles whenever we run this still. So it's very curious to look at it because you would actually think that that's a neck going straight up from the body, but that's really a partial condenser that runs through from this floor that you're seeing, maybe another 3 meters up from that point. From there, then we go to the final condenser that then leads then to the product storage. So this is the workhorse pot still at the moment for the distillery. I mean, most of our pot still that we have here aged or in storage would have been produced on this Greg Farm still. And I think we teased that some other additions to our pot still in capacity. But for the moment, the Greg Farm is the baby that we use. It's not as temperamental as the Batson's bitch that Andrew mentioned. I mean, I never had the opportunity to operate with the still from Charles Batson, but you can see this still has a very similar design. So I imagine the product is actually quite similar from this pot still.
Hey, Don. There have been some independent bottlers, at least one I know of that has a bottle. It's called the Rockley Still Distillate. But then I think there's some conjecture about whether it's really a Rockley Still or whether it's a Greg Farm Still. Can you elaborate on any of that?
I myself am not certain. I mean, given what I've seen since I've been here now 20 odd years, I mean, the Rockley that Andrew would have shown you would have been in operation even before my time. So it's possible if you had production from that left Barbados they could be referring to the Rockley still. But surely for me, I would think it would be perhaps from this still.
Right.
So, but I can't say for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Matt, this is Andrew. For the Greg Farm still, we know who owned that still before, etc. And we know where that still came from, and that's definitely the Greg Farm still. But the Rockley still, to answer, I see Ruben was asking a question here, and I'll answer it. Ruben, there was a sugar plantation in Barbados called Rockley, and it's believed that still came from there. When it was decommissioned, I'm not sure. We do have like this. This here, I don't know if you guys can see that. This is our pot still. This is one of our from the vault. So this is 1956 to 1991. We do have other documents like this. We have lots of documents like this. We haven't had the time to go through all of these to find details like that, Ruben. But those are two questions we would like to answer ourselves. When was it decommissioned? Where exactly was it purchased? We believe that information is, if it's not in the archives here, it's somewhere out there. And Matt said when we first met, we spent 3 hours talking history. This is part of the fun. We like trying to find these things, trying to find a document to see if we can answer those questions. So Ruben, we're looking. Okay.
Next slide.
Okay, so I mentioned earlier the Blair still. So around 1943, there was a need for more rum. That's in the middle of World War II. And so the distillery purchased the Blair still. You can see it says Blair still number 67. That was a still license. So the first still ever license in Barbados would be number 1, number 2, number 3. So generally, the lower the still license number, the older the still. So that's a 67. And this still was primarily bought to produce rum for the Navy. It's 100% copper. If you come to the distillery and look at it, you will see it's copper. It has that beautiful blue-green. Personally, we had a really cool event. There was a gentleman who walked in the distillery one day with his entire family, his grandchildren, and he said he worked in this distillery around 1945, 1946 as a young man, and he asked if he could go in the distillery. So I took him in the distillery with his entire family, and basically, as a young gentleman, I think he said he was 13 or 14 at the time. His job was to check on the operators of this still And if you were to come to the distillery and see there are these steps that you have to walk up to read the dials. And for me, it was emotional, to be honest, to see this gentleman, this very elderly gentleman. First of all, when he came to the still and he realized the still was still there, he couldn't believe it. And then when he saw the stairs that as a young boy he had walked up and down many times to check this thing, and he walked up the stairs and he was kind of like looking down on his family, and it was just, for me, it was just like it was an amazing to share that with, because he was sharing a moment with his family, but it was amazing to share that. And I was so happy that he still was still there for him. And well, if you go to my camera, we have lots of information about these stills. We don't currently use the Blair still, but we could use it. We have all of the information, so this is just one of the documents we have. I don't know if you can see.
Blair Limited, yeah.
Right.
Is it I can't tell from the drawing. Is it a twin column?
Well, yes, it went through different iterations. So that's why we have lots of different drawings. Don, maybe you could advise where it actually is now.
Where it still is, or what, or how it was.
How it was last configured.
Oh, okay, right. It was really a two-column still at its prime. So you basically had the ability to strip and to rectify. Those were the two main aspects for that still. And it made what we considered then a heavier product that was then blended with a lighter product to age. So it wasn't, when it first started, obviously mainly for Navy rum, but later in its time, it was more used as the heavier base to match what was being made on one of the other stills we're going to chat about shortly.
Okay, sounds good.
Yeah, and I mean, Andrew didn't do it justice by when he said about those stairs. I don't even think they can be called stairs. That was, I've been looking at them, I was like, how did people safely navigate what was really a ladder going up, 6 or 7 levels? And working in a distillery, there are times you need to move at speed. So I can imagine when you had time, you were able to go carefully up, but to come down quickly or go up quickly would have been quite an endeavor on that still.
Very, very much so. That's my recollection.
Right, and I think this is the still I was mentioning before, where at the time it was purchased, which was the mid 70s. Really then made a slightly lighter product than what was made on the Blair. Now, just for the record, I'll have to say this is my favorite still at West Indies Rum. I mean, the product from the columns or the pot, all are great, but in terms of operating any one of the stills, this is the one that I would say we have the most fun with. You can see there from the photograph, one of the operators, he has his hands right on the knob trying to make an adjustment to the flow. So this is practically the most hands-on still in the entire distillery. It's also the most versatile still because we can make a range of products. I see here 12, it could be actually slightly more. It has over 5 modes that we can configure it to. And then within those 5 modes, we can make different changes to where we add water, whether it's extractive distillation that we're using, whether it's 2-column, 3-column, single column. And it was well designed. We haven't really changed much on this still since it was installed in 1975. If you see the drawings that we do have still, and you then match that to what is there, it's probably 99% identical to what it was at the start. Unfortunately, and for reasons of age, we don't get to run it as often. But as I said, whenever it operates, it's the most fun still we have. I mean, you're not going to be able to sleep working on this still. You know, you're up, down the stairs, you're changing the knobs, you're taking the samples, you can see the product safes. If you really have the ability to zoom the picture, you can see the safes right on that control panel as well. So this was the time before automation or that electronic driven, computer driven controls. Everything there was a dial or a knob or a flow meter or a physical safe that you had to you had to use all of your senses to really see if the still was doing what it was supposed to do. Right, and I probably should have added at that time in the mid 70s, that again was a need. We had to put that still in place because we just got to a point where we could not satisfy the demand we had. So that was a step up from the Blair in terms of capacity. And similarly with the Stony Webster still, which is the number 79 still, which is our most modern still at the moment. Again, that was another need to increase capacity, and that was purchased in 1995. And I was fortunate to be involved in the early stages of its operation. I wasn't here when it was actually installed, but very soon after, that started my time at the distillery. So I'm very comfortable with that. With this still, it's more of the column still that many people see, where it's either 3 or 4 columns, and it has the ability to do a far lighter style of a rum than the Blair, say, or the 77. However, we're tinkering, I would say, with the possibility of being able to produce heavier style rums on this column. It would involve a bit more of a redesign of certain key sections, but we do believe we're capable of getting those design aspects right, and then being able to use this still, which is the largest capacity, to be able to say, well, we can produce even a wider range of products and allow it to get the versatility that the 77 still has. It's fully stainless steel, and there are sections that we obviously have to use copper for quality reasons. But unlike the Blair and the 77 still, it doesn't have as high a percentage of copper in the rectifier as in this still. It's mainly predominantly sieve trays, as opposed to tunnel cap trays in the other 2 stills and bubble cap. But it still works very well. It's very energy efficient, and that fits the mode of operation that we are moving towards, where we, as I said before, we are sustainable on our supply, and we are lowering our carbon footprint as best as possible. So any device that can conserve energy, and this still came designed with that in mind. So it fits right in with the ethos that we have at the moment.
And I can't help but notice that the one from 75 was number 77, and this is 79. So in those 20 years, there was only one additional still introduced in Barbados within 20 years.
Yeah.
Well, Matt, what I would like to add there is, Barbados is generally considered the oldest known historical reference to rum, modern rum as we know it, is 1650 March the 30th, 3 Houses Plantation, Barbados, wood and mastic cisterns. Mastic is a type of tree that used to grow in the Caribbean, but it still grows in the Caribbean. And for going back to, so rum was very small then. Our original still, so the original George Stade still only produced about 600,000 LPA per year. So it was more than half the size of, say, the smallest significant distillery in Barbados. So people may tend to think, a column still is a column still like this column still here. Up until this still came to Barbados, the Barbados rum industry was actually quite small in terms of export volumes and revenue. The government numbers show that in 1994, before this still was purchased, Barbados revenue from rum was approximately $3 million US. 3.
Yeah.
Okay, so it was not a huge export business. Once our friends in Jamaica, obviously a much larger country, and hi Michael from NRJ, I saw you there. Hope everything is good and you're surviving the flooding in Jamaica, Michael. Once they came along, they really had the size of being a much larger island, and also Guyana. Barbados was the origin, and yes, we produced good quality rum, etc. But our rum industry was not huge. Our columns, compared to some of the other countries, were not. The amount of rum we were producing was very, very small compared to some of the other islands. We've even seen records where Tobago, which is a small island north of Trinidad, was producing more rum than Barbados at one point in time.
Right.
So.
And my recollection as well is from probably the 1940s or 50s on through 1994 or so. There were only 3 operating distilleries in Barbados, 2 or 3. I don't know exactly, but yeah, it was pretty small.
Yeah, and I don't think I've told you this, but at one point we were looking to purchase. So we were looking to purchase the second largest one, which was just up the road from us. It was called Barbados Distillers Limited. It doesn't exist anymore, but we were actually looking to purchase that as well. So we have all of their still diagrams, their technical. We could build their still, and then we have in documents on one side of the page it says what West Indies Rum has, what type of still, and what are the assets, and then what Barbados Distillers Limited has, like all of the technical components of the company. And on top of that, what we recently found, we found analytical results of the rum they were producing that were done like there were it wasn't just like one test that was done, there were several tests done. So we have the technical drawings, we know their equipment specification, and we know their analytical specs of a distillery that doesn't exist anymore. How cool is that?
Yeah, and I will say that's, as a historian like you, like I caught wind of this distillery, like I saw references to it, and I've spent hours and hours and hours trying to find any reference to it, and I've only had 2 or 3 things that like proved that it existed, but unlike every other distillery, there was nothing, like no customers or anything. So now I'm really curious to learn more about it.
Yeah, and I mean, even here, a lot of these things were in the vault, and as we go through the vault, page by page, you will know, Matt, from searching, it takes a lot of time. You just find these little nuggets of information that are just so cool. They really are a part not only of West Indies rum history, they're a part of Barbados' history, and they're part of world history, to be honest.
Right, for sure. Yeah, and it's always little nuggets. It's never the whole story. It's like you have to piece together lots of little tiny details and try to construct the actual story. Okay, let's move along. We still have more stills.
Yeah, this one, Dario's there looking on. I'll give him a chance to get more.
Well, yes, I guess on the Vulcan triple chamber still, I mean, this is the only operational one from the original period. Because this is the style of still that tried to fill a void between the traditional pot still and the new emerging at the time, the new emerging column still. So this would have been a 19th century production for the actual the Vulcan, and it was acquired in 1945 at the distillery, 41, sorry. But the very interesting part of this still is that it tried to combine what was taken as the production method at the time, which was the pot still, which is a simple batch. You put the wash or the fermented molasses in a kettle light shade, you boil it, and the vapors come off. That is your distillate. The column still takes that and repeats that over and over, and hence you get your levels, your different levels, which you call your trays. And you get multiple distillations, and hence your column distillation. Now the triple chamber still, that try to combine the rate at which you can distill for the column and the use of a single batch distillation. Whereas in a continuous distillation like the column still, you more select a consistent profile that you want to achieve. With a batch distillation, you are going to get all of the flavors you have in your fermentation. You just get it along and spread out along a timeline. So what the Vulcan really does well is it takes that batch distillation style and allows you to repeat it on a faster timeline. So with a traditional pot, you have to put in the wash, you distill, then you empty it, you let it cool for a bit, and you start it all over again. With the Vulcan, as you can see in the diagram, which is a rough estimation of how it works, not completely accurate, but you can see we would have 3 distinct chambers. In the bottom chamber, where you can have your what we call the heating aspect of the still. This is where you generate your heat source that will boil the wash and more or less drive off your rum. So your bottom chamber is you develop your heat. In the middle chamber, that is where the distillation occurs. And then in your top chamber, you're preheating the next set of wash to be distilled. So you no longer have to wait for that initial heating up period where you're going to go do your next distillation. So you can keep doing batch after batch after batch in a very short amount of time compared to when you're using the traditional batch or pot distillation. And this is the only one in the world that was built in the 19th century that is still in operation. And we are still using it to this day with the original with the original setup. Some modifications have been made externally to it, but this is the original how it's set up. We are running it, and it is producing some very good rums. I was lucky enough to be here for the revival, so I got to see we were essentially waking it back up for quite a long slumber, and it has been quite a joy to actually reawaken this historic piece.
A couple of questions there. If I remember it correctly, the idea is that that everything sort of flows down through the still, that the fermented wash goes into the top chamber, it will eventually flow into the middle chamber where it's actually distilled, and then that sort of the vinasse that's left in there would sort of flow down into the bottom chamber, and that's what would be reheated. Is that the general idea?
Yes, the overall idea is that the top section, this will hold the next set of wash for you to distill. So hence we call it a preheating, because during the actual distillation in the middle, you will see a line going straight through the center of the top. And when it goes through, it's not interacting directly, but the heat from it is being offered up to that top chamber. So the wash for the next distillation will be already almost at the temperature for boiling. The middle chamber will then receive, when we're going for a new charge, when that's already preheated, we then transfer the top chamber to the middle chamber. And then the middle chamber, which has been stripped of all of the rum, will then be sent to the bottom chamber. So even if you transfer too early, you still have another chance of recovering any remaining alcohol in what people call the vinasse or the spent wash, depending on which region you're dealing with. And then once you've recovered all you can recover, that vinasse is then sent out through the bottom, and you start the whole process again. So you can just keep doing this charge after charge after charge.
And second question, is this a still that was air-cooled, that had the sort of interesting air-cooled arrangement?
Right, so as I mentioned, from the original design, it would have been modified externally, and that is part of the external modifications, where it used section that was used in another still arrangement. And it's a very interesting condenser where you have more or less horizontal air channels, which are tubes. So they're hollow tubes, and they allow for air, natural air, to pass through. And on the inside, you would then have the rum vapors. Now, traditional condenser, traditional coolers, you use water on one side, and you have the vapors on the other side, and the water then cools the vapors. With this arrangement, you have the air, the natural air, so you don't need any pumps, you don't need any fan, just natural air flowing through, and that is able to offer up some cooling. And you can actually get a lighter product, depends on how you interact with the main body, how fast you run the distillation, how much heat you present, and that can actually offer up a lighter distillate if you choose to operate it in that manner.
Okay, yeah. So sort of utilizing the natural air currents of Barbados, being by the ocean.
Yeah, so that's one of the good advantages of being get that sea breeze offering up some additional help.
Great. All right, let's move on.
Hi, Matt, and just one thing to add there from what Dario was saying. That air cooler is actually part of what was the original um, inception distillation unit from 1893. So we've been able to maintain that touch with our origin. Right. So what you're seeing here on the screen now is what is going to be the latest addition to the distillation capacity of West Indies rum. So in addition to the Vulcan, we have the Greg as you went through. We have the 77 and 79 as column stills. Those are the four presently working distillation units at West Indies rum. The others being the Rockley and the Batson's Bitch are not presently in working order, nor is the Blair, but we do have plans with the Blair. But we've been able to get a fifth still, and this should be part of our production schedule very shortly. When I say very shortly, believe me, it is very, very shortly, before the end of 2020. And it's been a year of not very good news for the entire world, but hopefully this is one of the bright moments for the year that we can share with everyone. Now, this is, again, being in touch with our history, which in Barbados, we love that part of being conservative. We never stray too far from our roots. It's a fully copper still, and it's designed based on what we found in our archives. So it wasn't just an arbitrary design. We asked a company to give us. We looked through our archives, looked at what we felt would have been a good idea for us still to resurrect that old style of rum, that double batch distillation. And this is the final design. Now, the feature that I'm interested to see how it works here in Barbados is the worm and tub arrangement, which you can see there on the right-hand side of the photo. And I mean, obviously our climate isn't as cool as temperate climates, but we do believe we can still get a fantastic product from this. It's made from hand-beaten copper. It took us a while to actually get everything right with this. So it was a long process from the concept to the final design, then to the manufacturing. But we're really eager to get it in place and eager to share the results, the product we get from it with the rest of the world. So stay tuned, and hopefully the next time we are in a forum like this, we'll be able to report on what we've been able to produce.
So is the idea that that the hot pot will work in conjunction with one of the other stills, or what? Can you tell us a little more about that?
Yeah, we are still looking at the operating regime in terms of what we plan, but it will be able on its own to distill both a first batch from wash or distill the second batch. How it fits in with say the Greg or the Vulcan, it's going to be located in that same area, so we're not 100% sure what will be the best operating pattern for it. But I mean, the opportunities are there. We can do a pop run after the first run on the Greg, or maybe the first run on the Vulcan.
Okay.
Or even the first run on the hot pot, and then the second run on the Greg. And the name has meaning for us here at West Indies Rum. The hot pot, basically, that name is, if you ask anyone in Barbados, where is the hot pot, they will take you to a spot on the beach that's like right next to the distillery, within 20 meters, where the water coming from the power plant is slightly warmer than the sea temperature at that point in time. So people use it in the morning as a way to get going. It's like I won't say a warm or hot tub, but it is slightly warmer than ambient. So people have referred to it over the years as the hot pot. So we felt it would have been a good idea to name the new pot still alongside with what we know as the hot pot, where people come and enjoy the sea and the beach before they go to work or before they start the day.
Okay. So somebody asked a question, just sort of, if you were to answer right now, what stills are sort of currently operating or coming online very quickly? How many stills are that? Which are they?
Oh, okay. Well, I just went through that a bit, so I'll go over it again. We do have the Vulcan, the Greg, the 77, and the 79. Those are the four working active distillation units, and then the hot pot will be number 5.
Okay, great.
But Matt, before we go on to the other slide, just to further answer your question, we believe those pot stills, including the Vulcan, are really a part of world history, but they're made out of copper, and the more you use them, the thinner they get, the less they are likely to be operational. So one of the other reasons for getting the hot pot is also as part of preservation, to try and preserve those stills, so not to work them as hard. We have built the hot pot, which is based on the historical records, and that will be more of a workhorse. And with the Maison Ferrand team and the West Indies Rum team, those two guys there are both Barbados scholars, Don and Dario, in engineering. I am not. And we have lots of other additional projects coming down the stream that
Okay,
that
yeah,
you guys
yeah.
will
I think
see
that sort of the
shortly.
touch on what you were saying there about being the workhorses. My understanding is that the initial distillation, the stripping run, is harder on a still, maybe more acidic, sort of wears it down faster than the subsequent spirit run.
Yes, that is correct.
Yeah, but I think when you're over 150 years old,
Fair
any
enough.
distillation is going to
Fair
be
enough.
hard on you.
Okay, let's move on.
Yeah, just very quickly. So mentioned before, West Indies rum produces 82% of Barbados rum. It really, when built by George Stade and really all the way through, has been the backbone of Barbados rum. It was built, and it has produced rum for many different brands. These are some of them there, and you could see kind of like how a laptop has Intel inside or whatever inside Microsoft. You would have had a family, they would have had their family name. So you can see Stades, and then the family name. The Stade Special Refined Rum, JO2, that one is dear to my heart because my great-grandfather was a businessman in Barbados, and that was actually his rum brand. And my mother lived with him, and she remembers seeing the people labeling those bottles. That rum doesn't exist anymore. And the J was Joseph Onesimus Tudor, was his name. And those labels are thanks to a distillery employee. Well, if you can put the camera on me for a second. A distillery employee who kept a souvenir scrapbook of different labels and different brands that the distillery would have sold rum to over the years. And when he retired, he gave his collection of all of those old rum labels to the distillery team. And I like to thank him for that. And we plan to preserve that as well for everyone to enjoy.
Yeah, and just a quick note on that. I think some people may be curious. Cockspur, my understanding is that Cockspur was owned by the Goddard family, who also owned West Indies, and that once West Indies was sold to West Maison Ferrand, the Cockspur brand did not come with it. It was sold separately to somebody else. Is that accurate?
Yeah, and Goddard's had its own rum brand. Cockspur rum was started by Valdemar Hansel, and he actually was Ehrman Stade's lawyer. We have a document here where Ehrman Stade is giving power of attorney for his shares in the distillery to Valdemar Hansel. And Valdemar Hansel was on the board of the distillery for many, he was on the board until he died. We have documents signed by him, and he was the founder of Cockspur Rum. But that was a separate company to West Indies Rum. They were a customer of West Indies Rum. Goddard is a family that purchased Hansel Innes, but also purchased the majority of the shares in the distillery. So you could think of both of them were owned by the same company, but really for many years, Cockspur Rum for well over 100 years, Cockspur Rum was a customer of the distillery, but it was owned by a company that owned both the distillery and the brand. Does that explain it? Make sense?
Yeah, no, for sure. Exactly. Yeah.
And obviously we're proudly and happy to be the home of Plantation Rum now. Super excited, to be part of that team, Okay, we'll do the next slide.
We have very short discussion here on aging. So we do have a number of bonds that we use for aging rum. And you can see there how we store rum is palletized. And it's normally 6 barrels to a pallet. And in some of our warehouses, we can stack as high as 6 levels high. Losses can vary. There are some areas that are warmer, even on site here, based on the design of the warehouse, the type of roof or the type of wall, be it masonry or galvanized cladding. And you can see there on the right-hand side, the cooperage. That building is basically the same as it was when it was first put there in the 1930s. And what we're looking at there is one of our hoop drivers. And we have the ability to construct barrels if we so desired, but our preference at the moment is to bring the barrels in as whole barrels in very good condition, bourbon barrels, and then they are filled through the head and bung placed, and then they're put there to rest or to age for as long as we require them to age. Now, we do have the ability to mix small barrels as well. So our cooperage is staffed by a number of people here at the distillery, and they're very proficient at being able to change a stave, make very boutique or miniature barrels. And that's an area that we're going to delve into a bit more detail so that we can, well, not really detail, but more in a bigger way, because we want to get people more experience, and we're going to make it a larger area that people who visit the distillery can come and see the activity, how it was close to when that cooperage was first built. So we're going to see a lot more activity of changing heads, building a brand new barrel from scratch, driving hoops, changing hoops, riveting the hoop together. But so stay tuned for that as well.
All right, and in terms of going back, it's mentioned a lot of the experimentations that we're now looking at. We really had to see and really try to revive some of the old documentation that would have listed some techniques from the past. I really try to see what it can offer in the current environment, what we can do with it. And this is where we really mix the scientific backgrounds as well as the artistic knowledge for making the rums. Now, with doing all these experiments, we must have a very good control system. And production works very closely along with engineering. You see Michael Marshall there in the center with the QA lab to make sure that we're always on point, and we're always going towards where we need to be. So we have a very established tasting panel where we can check our daily production every single day. We check and make sure we're still within our quality rum. And this is opened up to the entire plant. So we have members from the engineering department, warehouse, the main office, production. We have a wide range of persons who interact in the tasting panel and offer up their suggestions. How we like to be inclusive and make sure that everyone's included when we do our analysis of the different rums. So we also make sure that in the daily production, we are a 24-hour operation. Our operators, the persons who are still during the day and during the night, they assess the product coming off every 4 hours, sometimes more, sometimes less, depends on how it's behaving and what we really need to achieve. So if all these daily inputs we can now expand into our experimentation field where we can explore the wooden vat fermentation versus stainless steel fermentation. We can explore the various yeast strains. We can explore whether the Vulcan production versus a double batch for, let's say, the Greg form. And we can explore all these different avenues because we can rely on our tasting panel, our GC machines to give us accurate and very quick responses and feedback that we can then use to develop new brands. We can develop new types of rum and really explore what is really possible in the rum environment.
Dario, quick questions on that topic of experimentation. Steve Marguerite from Australia had asked about using brackish water. How is the salinity and the mineral salts controlled? That's a very specific question. Can you talk a tiny bit more about the seawater fermentation experimentation?
Right, sure. So remember, I started off with saying fermentation is the most complex process in this whole rum making environment. That's because yeast, they go through, or they have the ability to go through various pathways, and this includes making more esters, prothenols, and we could list all different components. Now, what drives the yeast to go in a particular direction over another production? It would be their environment. So you can put these in large categories. So you have the pH, you have the nutrients or lack of nutrients, you have the temperature, you even have the difference in temperature between the start and the finish. So when you involve seawater, you're now introducing a lot of minerals, you're introducing a change in the pH, you're now introducing stresses on the yeast. Now, with this controlled stress, you can encourage yeast to go faster, to give more fusel oils, to give more esters. You can encourage yeast in certain directions based on how much stress you put on them. So you can do the salinity from the seawater along with less nutrients. You can use pH conditioning. You can even, well, what the temperate regions do is that they can actually set up the fermenter at lower temperatures and not use a temperature control. And the more, in this region, we have to use temperature control because we don't want it to go too far. So it's not just using the salinity or the mineral aspects from the seawater. It's including that into a structured program of, say, using the right amount of nutrients, controlling the pH, controlling the right amount of stress onto the yeast. Then develop, you can go heavier, you can go more ester, you can even go more fusel if you so desire, just for using that component. And then you can also bring in certain bacteria and certain flora from the sea itself that are going to offer their own category of flavors. So you're really introducing the sea or brackish water or any other spring water or any water source. You're going to introduce that environment into the fermentation, and then that is going to offer its own unique flavor compounds, and then that stress or that competition to the yeast will also push the yeast into the direction of giving you certain flavors. So it's a multifaceted sort of operation. It's not as simple as just say, let's add some seawater and get some sea flavor at the end of it.
Right. Okay, and real quick, because I know we're running a little late here, but my understanding is that you're not fermenting entirely with seawater. It's a little bit of seawater along with.
Right. So that's why it was very specific. It introduces. So you still want your yeast to survive, and they're very fussy creatures. Same way that you need a comfortable environment. It's not too hot, too cold. You need your nutrients.
Dario, don't give out all your secrets, you hear?
So it's really about how well you can manage the introduction and how much you want to put into your fermentation systems.
Yeah, but it's a fairly small. It's not. You're not.
Yeah, very, very small. Yeah, it's not like you put the whole.
Yeah, you're not bucketing in water from the ocean to the fermentation tanks.
No.
Okay, all right. Let's move along.
Okay, what I like to say there, by training, I'm a chemist, and I tell these guys and I tell the QA team, I'm so jealous. get to play with these stills and they get to do all these cool fermentation experiments. It's great. Just a quick reply to a question. Christina on the labels, that would be great. Thank you very much. If you give the information to Will or Matt, that would be great. We said a lot on the historical research. We have tons of information. I think the point is clear. We actually have the board of directors minutes going back to 1913. And this is some of the pile here. I might have to stand up. So,
yeah.
And a lot of it is handwritten, and not everyone has good handwriting, and it's in old penmanship, so some of it's quite difficult to read. So it's sometimes, but the thing is, we have a vault, and we will be sharing this information. We don't see this information as belonging to West Indies rum, etc. We see this as part of world history, world heritage. It's something to be shared and appreciated by all. And we're working on a project to present it in a way that it can be shared with more people.
Yeah, and we're going to get you to scan those any minute now.
Okay. Yeah, that's a project there. Okay,
Yeah.
We'll do the next slide because I think we're on the time. Sustainability. By training, I'm an analytical environmental chemist. Like I said, I'm also a surfer, and we love the environment, but the team here loves the environment. And our goals are to be carbon neutral by 2030. That's our objective. We're working towards it. We just replaced the roofs of some of our buildings, and we're going to be installing our first phase of solar. And we're very excited about that. We're actively working with farmers, etc., to try and have sustainable molasses, Bon Sucro certified, free trade, and fair trade certified molasses is very important. Anything we do, we want it to be sustainable. That long after I'm gone and the team here is all gone, that this will continue to work. And then obviously beach conservation. We have a very large beach in front of us. All beaches in Barbados are public, and that's a great thing. So the beaches belong to the public, but we are working to preserve the beach. It is a known turtle nesting area. Also on the Barbados coat of arms, there's a pelican, and every year we have started seeing a pelican, one sole pelican coming by the distillery, and it hangs out in the sea because in front of the distillery is a very quiet area. There are very few people that swim in the sea directly in front of the distillery. So that's it for sustainability, but for us, sustainability is very important.
All right. Just very quickly on the COVID-19 response. So during the real lockdown period for Barbados, I mean, there was a very, very high demand, a very big call for not just companies but persons in the country to try to do more towards the community, and we would have taken the opportunity to amend our production to assist with this in terms of trying to produce the hand sanitizer gel for some of the government services, which is listed here: the police, fire, port authorities, the homeless association, and various other organizations. And it was more out of the national duty for us as a company within Barbados to help the wider community. You can go ahead. Right.
Dario, just to add there, this is Andrew. I was very, very proud, and I would like to publicly thank the staff of the distillery. I mean, when Barbados basically was locked down, so you were not really allowed to leave your home on certain days, etc. They had a passcode where you had to get a QR code for your phone, and we worked every single day. We never stopped working. Basically, as you guys know, in March, April, it was very difficult to get medical alcohol. And I'm really proud of the distillery team. People could have chosen to stay home. It would have been very easy for people to call in sick. Everyone came to work every day, and they followed all the rules. They kept safe. We've had no cases here at the distillery, and I'm really proud of them. And we can't wait for COVID to be over, because we're going to have an event to recognize the staff and really to thank them. But I really felt proud coming to work and seeing the effort the staff put in there. So I just wanted to publicly say to the distillery staff, and including Don and Dario, thank you guys very much. It was very meaningful. Okay.
Okay, and Matt, I guess it's a bit unfortunate we are out of time and we'll be able to discuss Stays Rum that much. But we teased at it earlier in the discussion, and this will now be the brand of West Indies Rum, 100% owned and developed by the team here at West Indies Rum. Two expressions to begin with, a gold rum and also a white rum. I know some of the text is too small already to see, but it harks back to what George Stade would have done when this was first started. We're creating the best rums, being able to use it in almost any brand who wanted to use a very good high quality rum, but never having his own brand or a brand that the distillery owned. And we believe we need to complete that step of what he started. So yes, we still make excellent rums we can provide to various brands, that we still do. But this is an important step that all of our staff are looking forward to. It's going to be bottled here in Barbados as well. And I would think by the end of the year, this is a product that's available to the world. It's a wonderful rum. I've had the pleasure of being part of that development team and nosing and tasting both the gold and the white rum. And it sits well with any rum out there on the market right now. So I won't say much more about it. The product will speak for itself, both the look, the feel, and the taste of it. So stay tuned for that. And that's probably one of many products you're going to see from West Indies Rum in the near future. Sorry, Matt, you're muted at the moment.
Sorry, yeah. Very exciting. And like it says there, exclusive to Barbados in 2020. I assume that it will start spreading out worldwide as quickly as you can make it.
Yeah, and I mean, there's a way around that. You can come to Barbados and spend some time here. You can work for Barbados and you will be part of that exclusive club.
Don't think we haven't thought about it.
I'm sure you have.
Yes. All right. Any more slides here? Okay. All right. Well, thank you all. I know we ran a little over on time. We have some great questions, but I think for the most part, we've covered the main topics that people are looking for. I want to thank you all again very much. Great presentation. And we have yet more WORSPA sessions to do on member distilleries. So you're not the last of them. Anything you guys would like to say before we hand it over to Will to take us out?
For me, I would just say thanks to everyone that took the time. And like I said at the start, one of the beautiful things about the marriage between Maison Ferrand and West Indies Rum is went to the government of Barbados and to the distillery staff that 100% of profits go back into these projects. So when you support Plantation Rum and Maison Ferrand and our brands and the West Indies Rum Distillery rum, all those funds go back into financing these stills, doing this research, all of these documents, etc. We really just want to make good products. We want to make this a sustainable industry for Barbados. Right now, Barbados only exports about $40 million US. So after 300 years, say, of producing rum, we're only doing $40 million. Cognac does 3.4 billion euro a year. So we have a long way to go. It's a huge opportunity for us in Barbados, and hopefully together it will become a reality. And the longest journey starts with the first step. So thank you, Matt. thank you. I know you had a hurricane, and I really appreciate you making the effort. And thanks to your friend. We will have to send him a bottle of rum to tell him thank you. Really appreciate the effort. And thank you, Will, behind the scenes. Thank you, Don. Thank you, Dario. I really appreciate it. Great job.
You're welcome, Andrew. Thank you as well. And again, thanks to Worspa for organizing this, and thanks to everyone who attended. Hopefully there'll be more in the future.
Yeah. Okay. And Will, good. Come back.
Yeah. Hey, yeah, thank all of you so much. Just want to echo what Matt said. I've just been sitting here looking at the comments on the screen to my left, and just so many people really appreciative of the three of you taking the time to share your knowledge today. I think Matt always talks about, one of the goals of these is to bring people with that production knowledge who rum enthusiasts don't get to hear from as much into the forefront. And this has been a great example of that. So thank you to the three of you guys. Thank you, Matt, for the last minute Hail Mary attempt, which was successful to get internet access.
Love it. Super glad I didn't miss this.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad to have you here as well. I'm no substitute for your knowledge of Barbados rum, so it was fortunate for everyone. But yes, I think we'll be back in 2 weeks with another producer. So everyone stay tuned for that announcement soon.
All right. Okay. Thank you, everybody, and see you later.
All right. Bye, everyone.